Kia ora mai, it's Mike Atkinson. This presentation is looking at top rope instruction, specifically for the Nazoya leader qualification. This is really looking at developing a top rope system that you can use in defining the roles in a top rope system, and some tips and tricks, suggestions around how to run a safe and systematic top rope session. So when we're talking about the top rope system, we are looking at the specific roles of a top rope for beginners. So we're looking at the climber, the belayer, backup belayer. So they're the key three people for a top rope system. And then you may have a fourth, depending on numbers and how you divide people up, how the group's up. But you might have a manager as well. So we'll look at that as another role. And then some of the processes to think about when you're running a top rope session around communication and safety checks, and some ideas around progressions. Now, before we move on, when you're choosing a crag to go to, obviously you want to go to a crag where they have easy climbs and then they're achievable for your clients. Right? You want to give the client success by feeling like they've achieved something. So making it better to have easier climbs set up than too hard. Ideally, a range is good. And just think about that climbs do not always have to go right to the top. Quite often, as climbers, we think that climbers finish at the very top, and usually they do, but beginners don't know that. So you can, if there's a hard and easy climb at the start, but gets harder at the top or halfway up, then you can just create the focal point lower down, and the climb finishes where the focal point is. So think about that for depending on the crag that you're using. So once you're set up with the top ropes ready to go, gather everyone around one rope, one top rope setup, and you're going to brief the group on different roles. Now, some of the key things to talk about to the whole group are around what happens if rocks get dislodged, so the call of rock and not to look up, keeping fingers out of bolts if there's bolts on the crag, and climbers that stay in line with the rope above them. Right? You don't want them going off to the side, then they'll pendulum. When you get in the group together, move them so they can see primarily the lock-off hand of the belay. The belay action is probably the most important thing that they need to see. And so move the group so they can see the lock-off hand of the belayer. When you are choosing people to do the demonstration for the whole group, probably a good idea to have an experienced belayer to demonstrate good practice, or the best way of doing it, the correct way of doing it to start with. So that could be yourself if you're the most experienced person there. So you could put yourself as the belayer, and then when you put in a climber on, someone who's quite capable so they can actually get off the ground. It doesn't put people off by making it too hard. So with the climber, you want to think about some tie-in options. So just tying in with a re-threaded figure eight with a handspan tail is a good option and requires less gear. Or two locking benders, opposed locking benders with a figure eight on a bite or a bowline on a bite are good options. You want to get the climber to set a goal of how far they want to try and get to, and that might be the anchor point or the focal point benders, which was the top. So they just touch those and get lowered off. And keeping their body position when they're being lowered, emphasizing legs wide apart and body upright, and the hands can be on the rope in front of them. And you might want to give some simple climbing techniques, probably not straight away. You want to get them up and running first, and then you can start to embed some simple key points around climbing techniques. The belayer is probably the most critical role, and to make sure that your emphasis and concentration is primarily on the belay and the action of the belayer. It may seem simple if you've been doing it for years, but some people do struggle with the pull, lock, grab, slide method. Some of the key things to watch out for is when the lock-off hand is locked off down, and then the other hand, usually the left hand, comes underneath, right, and locks off with their thumb up. left hand has their thumb up, and no disco stances. So when they're waiting for the climber to move, they're taking the slack rope. They're not having that left hand high up on the rope. It's locked off next to the brake hand. Where you position the belayer, so make sure they're reasonably close to the crag, within body length of the crag, and feet front and back, so they're braced. A backup belayer, again, another key role. This is your insurance policy, really. If they do get it wrong, the belayer does get it wrong. Now, the best method I've found over the years is to have that the backup belayer has a prusik on the rope clipped into their belay abseil loop on their harness. They still have a smile in the rope. You can see a smile or loop in the rope there. But if everyone lets go, if the belayer lets go and the backup belayer lets go, then you still hold the climber, which is really great. Obviously, you don't want that to happen, but it does provide the extra reassurance. Now, making sure that backup belayer stands behind the belayer, not out to the side, so behind the belayer, and they can actually even be down on one knee if they aren't using a prusik, and holding the rope down on one knee to help with that lock off. So a couple of different options. You can just hold the rope, holding with the prusik, which is the method here, or have another belay device. So they could be practicing with another belay device here as well, which is again another good method. Either method you use, making sure there's a smile in the rope so you don't impede the belayer themselves, but there is that backup or reassurance there if needed. So the minimum number of people is 3 for a beginner top rope session, the climber, belayer and backup belayer. And if you have, depending on your numbers, you might have a 4th person. And to give them a role or something to do is the term manager is a good one. So they're kind of an overseer and they can take on various different roles. You can see in the image here, this person here is holding the shoulders of the belayer when they're lowering someone down, providing extra support. They can help manage the rope, coil the rope so it's neatly into a bucket or a mat, and providing encouragement. So different roles that they can take. So some key things to reinforce are the safety checks. You need to get them to do their own safety checks before they leave the ground, just like you would when you're climbing, but really reinforce those and making sure that they are checking the benders and checking the knots. But the key thing here is that you, as an instructor, are always checking before anyone leaves the ground. So you are checking their checks. All right, so then climbing group, the climber must not leave the ground until the instructor has or you have checked that they are good to go. In terms of climbing calls or communication, just use the ones that you've been taught. All right, so the got me, gotcha, really to lowering. Those ones are just use the same and make sure they're reinforced throughout the whole session. They will get slacked over time. As mentioned in the beginning, around you as an instructor doing a demonstration to the whole group of the top rope system and the different roles. So once you've done that, then you can look at getting them into their groups and getting them to have a practice belaying. So no one's leaving the ground, but you pull through a bit of rope from the climber's side onto the ground and hold a bit of tension there, and then they can practice their belaying action for the rope coming above with a little bit of tension on it, and you just feed them that tension through so they can practice with no one leaving the ground. And then the second stage progression would be where someone does tie in and as a climber and goes a couple of meters up the climb, maybe to the first bolt, head height, and then comes back down. So everyone's getting confidence in the systems and the processes there. And then the third stage would be for them to go as high as they want to. The climber goes up to the focal point or as high as they feel comfortable coming back down. And some final points about managing top ropes as an instructor. So thinking about Where you position yourself to supervise is really important, is key. And you can see this instructor here has positioned themselves so that they can see the lock-off hand of the belayer. That should be your primary focus. Quite often the focus tends to be on the climber. Everyone's eyes are up looking at the climber, but as an instructor your eyes should be down looking at the belayer, especially the lock-off hand. So make sure you position yourself for that. And being systematic about reinforcing the systems that you've set up from the start is really important. So be consistent throughout around that. Don't let that slack off. You'll need to keep reminding them about the systems and the checks, and that you are checking them before they leave the ground and before they're being lowered down.